So my talk this year is Your Story Deserves to Be Told. Some of you might know me. I got involved in social media and everything with podcasting a few years ago, and I ended up running a podcasting conference. And it ended up, well, it's still going on. It's less and less about podcasting. We started, it was really about techniques and how to record audio and video and produce and do the mechanical parts of it. And it evolved. It evolved into storytelling. So how to tell a story, how to capture an audience, how to relate to people, and how to do this. And it was great. We've had all kinds of people speak at our event, going into the history of storytelling. How we all have stories to share and how we all have wonderful storytellers and looking at different techniques that have been used. We've had artists, sculptors, filmmakers, radio people. The one thing that was never touched on, though, and it's weird because after 6 years of storytelling, is nobody really said why. Here's a whole bunch of people in our event, a couple hundred people or whatever, but there's a whole, you look at bloggers, you look at authors, nobody ever says why, other than, well, why do you blog? Well, to make money, you fuck. No, there's more to it than that. There's, any Hugh McLeod fans? So, stories are the way we understand each other and are the way we understand ourselves. And I learned that this year after 6 years of putting on a storytelling conference. So it came to me this year through a couple of stories. One of our friends, he lives in Nova Scotia, and somebody in his family was browsing an antique store or whatever, and they found this box of tapes. So he's an audio guy and whatever, so he buys the box of tapes. It turns out that in the tape, in the box, was a tape his great-grandmother had recorded explaining the family history. Just randomly, an antique store by the road. And they found out, and then they had this whole side of the family tree that they didn't know, that they ended up being able to connect with people and find, and with the internet. But this tape, all of a sudden now, there are 60 people directly descendant from that woman who had never heard her voice. And she talks for like an hour on this tape, telling the stories of how they came to Canada, how they did all the trials and tribulations of being in Canada in the early century. And what a wonderful story to have, and what a wonderful background to have. You try to think what would have motivated somebody to do that. Back then recording technology was new. So what made her think her story was important? Was she thinking, well, there's going to be 60 people in my generation after me who are going to need to hear these words? We don't know why, but I can tell you that they're all glad she did. So I'm here to encourage you to storytell. Nobody relates to a tweet, okay? I know a lot of us are on Twitter, a lot of us are on the internet, and a lot of us are doing things. It's so passing, and well, all the tweets are archived. So are farts, apparently. So don't have to worry about it. This is not how you're going to connect with people. I want you to tell your stories, and I want you to think about how you're going to tell your stories, and why. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Derek K. Miller, who was a blogger out of Vancouver. Derek and I met through podcasting in 2005. We had a lot in common in our mid-30s at the time. Musicians, technologists, podcasters, bloggers. Derek in 2007 was diagnosed with colon cancer. And being a storyteller, and a master storyteller actually, he could really tell a good story, he blogged about his story. But he didn't blog about cancer, he didn't blog about, here's the cancer and here's this, and then, no, this is the guy and what he lived through. And Derek actually passed away in April. And 10 years earlier, my father was diagnosed with colon cancer. The exact same diagnosis that Derek got. Derek got 4 years, my father lasted 6 months. But my father was a man of his generation. You don't talk about health, everything is fine, we're good. Hey Dad, how you feeling? I'm fine. Dad, you don't look fine, I'm fine. And that was the time, that's how they were taught to keep their stories to themselves. So what ended up happening is because I was friends with Derek and I was reading his blog, he was very open about what he's feeling and what he was, just the challenges of being in a room full of people knowing that next year you're not in that room. Things like this, the very human parts of it. And through Derek's stories, I was able to understand what my dad went through a lot better. I was able to conquer some demons I still had about my father's death. So it was very powerful. Now, were Derek's thoughts what my dad's were? Who knows, right? But now I had a story that I could latch onto that made me feel better. His blog and everything he's written is still there. Derek's no longer with us. Everything, his kids, who are 6 and 8, I think, will have lots of words. This guy wrote profusely, but they now have his stories. He's gone, his stories, he lives on through his stories. My dad, I think I have some pictures. So there's a difference there. If somebody had told my father that it's okay to tell your stories, go. It would have been a very different thing. So what's the benefit of telling the stories? Well, like I said, understanding. You can either understand a situation somebody else went through. If you're writing the story, you get some benefits too. I try to scroll up. So there's understanding, and there is the possibility of answers where there may be none. There were a lot of questions I didn't have answered from my father. Derek gave me some answers, and sometimes just having that answer, or an answer, it lets you move on, it lets you think about other things. I'm trying to scroll here. Give me paper. That's what I want, is paper. What are the benefits to you? If you write a story, and I'm not saying fiction, I'm saying if you write about something that's touched you and makes you feel something, you will understand what you have lived through better. And I'm not a storyteller by nature, but just by writing something, you will work through something. If your brain is occupied with a problem, there's only a certain number of plates you can keep spinning in your head. If you write it down and you tell that story, even if it's just to yourself, somehow you've put that plate aside and you can move on. You'll end up understanding yourself better and maybe how you reacted. And so if you're telling the story and you give instead of just saying, well, this person shit on me or whatever the situation might be, if you tell it as a story as if you're telling it to somebody else, you will find yourself telling both sides of the story. Or all 3 sides or 4 sides, or all stories have a lot of different things. So it's a very therapeutic exercise as well. So I encourage you to do that. One thing that people discuss is, well, nobody wants to read my shit. That's not up to you. Don't make that your decision. Don't edit before you write. Write your stuff, and then afterwards it's done. I belong to some songwriting workshops, and I'm not going to write a song, it's going to be shit. Yes, it will. The first 10 songs you write will be absolute garbage, but you're hoping the 11th will be better. But you have to get through those 10 first. So it's the same thing with storytelling. Write your garbage. The more garbage you write, the more chance there is of something being good. The exercise is phenomenal. If you just write something, you end up finding words you didn't know you used that way. You read it back and you learn about tone and all these things, and you start really exploring what it is that turns your crank. Sometimes like, well, what is it that's going to get me this? And then you read your story, and it's like, if somebody else were to read that, if you read your own story as a third person, all of a sudden you get new insight. In closing, I want to encourage you to write your stories. I'm not saying go out and blog. I'm not saying go out and do whatever. I'm saying take the time, think about a story, write it down. Put it somewhere. You get hit by a bus tomorrow, somebody has more insight into you. And if you don't get hit by a bus, you'll have more insight into you. Thank you.